Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? Welcome back out to the shop. It's been a minute, huh? I've spent so many weeks making audio recordings on my phone and then just, throwing those up on YouTube instead of coming out here that, the time has gotten away from me. But the weather's getting better. It can hang out here without freezing my corn-fried Newtons off. And I figured, well, why don't I jump out to the shop tonight and share a book that I recently finished for the second time, and that is Servants of War. It's kind of small here, and I don't want to spend the entire video holding it up like this, so we're going to do the whole movie magic bit, throw it up there for you. There it is. Servants of War is the 2022 horror fantasy novel co-written by Larry Correia and Steve Diamond. Those are the hosts of the Writer Dojo podcast. Larry is obviously the better known of the two, but he and Steve have been friends, and they've worked on projects before. I don't think to this extent. But Steve is very famously the horror guy. Legend has it that's even his license plate, just the word horror. He loves werewolf stuff and creepy movies and yada yada. Larry's a very prolific sci-fi and fantasy author, as well as an enjoyer of role-playing games. In fact, he just recently landed a contract with Atheon Books to publish a progression fantasy, which I'm given to understand is kind of the younger brother of Lit RPG. And so, in Larry we trust. I've read most of what he's written outside of his short stories for the last 15 years or so. Those I just generally don't keep up with. I don't read a whole lot of anthologies personally, but I've enjoyed pretty much all of his series. There's been a book here and there that I might have given 3 stars to. It's just one that I read and was like, okay, this was fine. It didn't knock my socks off the way that some of his other stuff has. But Servants of War is one that I heartily gave 4 stars to the first time that I read it. And then on this recent go through, I thought, well, maybe this will be one of those that if I go through it again, I'll kind of up it a little bit. I'll feel better about it a second time. And by the time I got to the end, I thought, no, 4 stars was accurate. It's a very well done book. There were just a couple of things that I think made it a little bit less than some of his other work, and I think that might be for a couple of reasons. But before I get too far down the road, let's talk about this book in particular. It's one that I would have to describe the setting before I got into describing the characters, because the setting almost is a character, and it has such a powerful influence on the characters and on the plot that you would need to understand that in order to understand what's going on in this world and the people in it. It's kind of an alternate dimension, a pocket universe or whatever. It is connected to our world, but you're given to understand that at some point in history, a whole bunch of Russo-Slavic peoples from Eastern Europe were teleported to this other world, and they've mostly kept their culture intact. They're called by different names. You've got a nation like Kolakovia, another nation like Almacia. There are nomadic people called the Romani, which they're basically like our Earth's Romani. They work as gypsies. They're traveling types. They're nomads, and they've got peculiar skills and cultural habits that only they have. So there are elements of real world Eastern Europe that then went over there and continued to evolve and change as one does. They are involved in a turf war between Almacia and Kolakovia, and the magic in this world is based on fragments of golems, of fey creatures that died and then their carcasses were turned into more or less mecha. That's kind of what this suit is on the cover. Why am I doing that? I already put this up there. I don't have to do that. These are called objects, which I thought was one of the less impressive elements of the story. I thought, like, oh, why not give it a slightly cooler name, like, you will be piloting this object, like, haha, go pick up the thing. It was a name that kind of took me out whenever it was mentioned. Nevertheless, it's a minor quibble. There are powerful factions, magical factions, even in-world deities that are all quarreling with each other, and as is often the case in fantasy like this, they are using mortals as their avatars for this combat. I suppose it's because it makes things a little bit more interesting to them. In Kolakovia, the 3 deities are 3 sisters. They, different groups worship different ones, and the village that our protagonist is from is beholden to one of these sisters and has to send young men to battle in her name, year after year, in this trench front between Kolokowia and Almasia. But they stopped doing it for a while, and our main character, his name is Ilarion Glaskov, he kind of shirks that duty, and then a terrible calamity befalls his village, and everybody dies except for him, and he's told in no uncertain terms that he needs to fulfill that obligation to his sister. He needs to go to the front and be a soldier in her name. So, he's dealing with the emotional fallout of that, but he's not going to let these people down, let them have died for naught. And so he goes and enlists in the Kolokovian military and finds out that he's very adept at operating these Fey-powered objects, these powerful suits. Once you're inside one of these suits, it's difficult to operate with major precision. One of the tests is to pick up a small kitten and pet it without squashing it. A lot of the cadets and their recruits fail that requirement, but Ilarion is very good at it. The better you are at it and the more you operate one of these things, the more the temperature increases. If you're a fan of the old MechWarrior Battletech novels from like 20 years ago, you'll remember that that was one of the consistent world building elements that like no matter who was writing the book, they had to put that in there. It's like as soon as you get engaged in combat and firing the weapons, like it gets really hot in the cockpit. This one is even more intense. In fact, the objects have crews of operators that work with them. So there'll be one of these big giant Fey golem mech things walking down the front, and he'll have a crew of other pilots around him, and they'll fire the weapons, they'll engage in combat and stuff. But the pilot can only operate it for a certain amount of time before he or she gets burned by the heat inside this thing, and the others have to pull him out, put a fresh pilot in, and keep going. If you've ever read a memoir by somebody who fought in the trenches of World War I, the brutality and the intensity of these combat scenes will seem very familiar to you, as well as the environment. It's sticky, heavy mud. They're moving heavy machinery through this mud. It can fall down. They can get stuck in it. They can get bogged. You can see how they'll win 10 feet of land, and then they'll have to defend it for a certain amount of time, and then the other side will bring in more resources, and they'll be stuck fighting over these few inches of land, seemingly in an endless quarrel. The endless nature of that fight is what then leads certain power players to look for supernatural advantages over the other side. One such figure is a special agent of the government, a secret policeman of sorts named Christoph Waltz. Very, very creepy dude. I wouldn't say outright that he's the villain. He is a very powerful antagonist, although he can play well with others when he needs to. He's very cutthroat, he's very practical, he's got a set of objectives, and anybody in between him and those objectives is, to him, disposable. He works directly for the Chancellor of Kolokovia, but he's also looking for ways to overthrow and replace that Chancellor with himself. He meets Ilarion and is one of the men screening him when he's testing out for the objects. He's also connected to the female lead of the book, a woman named Natalia, who is of that Rolmani faction. And he's got some leverage on her. I won't go into too much explanation as to what that is, but it's all very sound for the world and for the setting. And then the fourth character of major import is a man named Amos Lowe. He's a prisoner who's got very detailed and extensive magical knowledge, but he's trying to stay hidden. That's why he's staying in prison. And there are powerful people like Christoph and like the Chancellor Nicodemus who are looking for him because they want to leverage him the way that they leverage anybody for power. But he doesn't want to teach them the things that he knows because, well, these are very powerful and possessed men that are putting themselves on a path to apotheosis. They want to use this in-world magic to become gods, basically, conquer everybody in their world, and then go back to Earth, our Earth, conquer that, conquer other dimensions, or what have you. One of the peculiarities of the, we'll say the benediction that this Raven sister of Kolokovia gave to Ilarion is that he's so powerful in battle that, after he wins at a certain intensity level, we'll say, he's able to open up portals between that mortal realm and the Fey realm, whence the golem magic and the golem elements come. Christoph Waltz sees this, and he says, hey, I've got a theory that if we take a certain amount of troops through this portal, we can come out on the other side behind enemy lines in Almasia, and we can kind of circumvent this whole trench warfare thing we've got going on. The third act of the story is largely focused on this expedition of soldiers and whether this effort is going to succeed or not. I won't put any spoilers in here. Suffice it to say that it's a fantastic piece of combat fiction, and the layers that are revealed as the story goes along, they'll feel very familiar to you if you read any other of Larry's work. He's very good at parsing things out when you need them, and I thought that it ended on a very powerful note. I will say that as far as any quibbles I have with it, this is kind of a personal hang-up that I have generally with any book that's been co-authored by two writers. It always feels like it's maybe twice as long as it needs to be. That's, I think, overly critical in this particular case, but there were times when it kind of dragged on. And at times when I'm reading other pieces of Larry's fiction, like the MHI novels, for example, I personally am very susceptible to action fatigue, because these cool action pieces and whatever, like they can go on for a very long time. But I will say, in fairness, I do also read these in the audio format, and I just kind of ingest them en masse. And so if I were reading them in between other books of a different genre or something, it might be a welcome respite for that. That's just a personal hang-up that I have. Like I said, your mileage may vary. As far as content warning, there's a lot of intense horror elements to this, and Battlefront reality type things. There's a little bit of profanity, but it's really just like this is a violent war in between these two pseudo-Slavic countries in this alternate dimension. But I'm very curious to see how the world building develops over the next couple of books. From what I understand, Larry and Steve are working on the second one right now. I'm curious to see how this whole thing develops, and like not just the story, but the world. Like, what is the connection between the realm of Kolochovia to Earth? Which specific Eastern European country did these ancestors come from, and what's it all going to mean in the end? Thought it was very, very well done. I gave it, like I said, 4 stars, and after 2 readings, that rating holds very, very strong. So I do recommend you check out Instruments of War by Larry Correia and Steve Diamond. It's the first in the Age of Ravens series. Until next time, well, you guys know the deal. Check the description for relevant links to other sites where I do reviews, and you can find my books on Amazon. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.